Okay, I think we can get started. I'd like to welcome you all for coming. Thank you all for coming and welcome you. My name is, if you don't know me, my name is Christopher Tull. I'm the project manager for the California Data Collaborative. I just want to make a announcement that this presentation is being recorded. We're planning to share it. We'll post it to our YouTube channel after this, and we'll share it with all the attendees. So, just in case you missed something or you want to hear something again. If you're not familiar with the California Data Collaborative, we are a nonprofit membership-driven organization where water agencies collaborate to create tools and applied research that help them navigate uncertainty. Our goal is really a water sector that's inspired and empowered to make informed, data-driven decisions, and webinars like this are an important piece of that. This is the third webinar in our winter speaker series. Our speaker today is Dr. Casey Whitman. I'll introduce Casey in just a second, but I just want to make a note about questions. I'm sure there will probably be lots of them. So if you could just post them in the chat as we go along, we'll get to them at the end. Or at the end, we'll also have an opportunity for you to speak up and ask your question in person, if you prefer. So with that, I'd like to introduce Dr. Casey Whitman, who is an applied microeconomist at Georgia Tech, working on issues. Whoa, hold up. Sorry, this is what happens when my phone is ringing. Sorry. Casey is an applied microeconomist at Georgia Tech, working on issues at the intersection of environmental and public economics. His research focuses on how people interact with the natural and built environment, and how that behavior what that behavior reveals about environmental amenities. His research spans water and energy demand, valuation of environmental resources and infrastructure, urban transportation, public goods provision, demand for outdoor recreation, and climate change. He relies on the application of program evaluation techniques, often using large micro data sets to estimate causal effects of environmental policies on economic behavior. And prior to joining Georgia Tech, Dr. Whitman served as the research director of the Energy and Environment Lab at the University of Chicago and as a fellow at Resources for the Future, an environmental economics think tank in Washington, D.C. So with that, I'll turn it over to Casey.
Thank you, Chris. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I imagine we're all used to presenting on Zoom and living our lives on Zoom these days. So if we enter full screen, I imagine, yell at me if you cannot see this, but I am sharing my screen now. I think it should be sufficient.
Yeah, looks good, Casey.
Great, thank you. Okay, so thanks so much, Chris, for the introduction. As he mentioned, I am coming to you from Atlanta, Georgia. I'm an assistant professor at Georgia Tech. I'm going to be presenting some research that has been ongoing for a little while now with my colleague Diego Cardoso, who is a PhD candidate at Cornell University. And I'm going to talk about water affordability, but more generally, my research focuses on consumer behavior and primarily in the water sector, understanding how individuals respond to different types of pricing structures, different conservation incentives. And so I'm an economist by training. I'm coming at this from an economics perspective, and there will undoubtedly be some simplifying assumptions I've made in the things I'll present today. But I think what I want to focus on is the broader question of water affordability, how we economists think about it, and how we kind of go to the data to understand and learn and try to unpack what an efficient water affordability policy might look like, how we would go about measuring this on a wide scale, and really just understanding all of the nuts and bolts of what goes into water affordability. And I'm particularly excited to talk about this because I tend to talk to mostly academics, and we think about these questions in a very different way than the people who are actually working on these policies and implementing these policies. And so I really value the feedback and consideration of what's going on the ground and how can this research best inform practitioners and policymakers that are actually implementing these types of policies. So without further ado, I've got about a 30 to 40-minute presentation. I'm happy to have a conversation after the fact, but I'm going to just dive in. So the outline, we're considering water affordability. I approach this question thinking a lot about how much we're paying for water, how we can structure the price of water to best reflect the value of water. Usually encouraging conservation, but that has a flip side in the sense that water is a good or provides a service that we all need to survive. And I'm curious about, this started because I was curious about what was the incidence of water bills? How were different people paying? How much were they paying for water across the US? And, should we be concerned about the cost of water and sewer prices? So I'll present some trends in water service costs in the US, and start to think and unpack what is affordability. And second, I wanted to know how big the problem was. How many people in the US have unaffordable water and sewer service? And do these affordability concerns correlate with socioeconomic characteristics? And lastly, the first 2 points are mostly descriptive, but taking a step back, what would an affordability policy look like? What are the relative benefits of different types of policies that we could introduce? And so, that the last part is a bit more perspective and a bit more normative about what are the policy options we have and what are the relative benefits. Okay, so the key results from our study, and what we do is we calculate what people are paying for water and sewer services across the US for a large swath of the population relative to their socioeconomic characteristics. And what we find is that in our sample, which constitutes about 45% of the US population, we see 1 in 7 households in our sample face affordability concerns. I'll go into detail about how we calculate this, and we can discuss the relative benefits of how we actually measure affordability. But this is, at least, with what we're doing, this is the result, the kind of the headline result that we find. Not surprisingly, we find that households in the lowest decile of income spend more of their income on water and sewer service, but we calculate this number to be 8.1% of their annual income. And one thing that's also probably not surprising to anyone who works in this field is that median household income poorly captures the burden on low-income customers. So what we do in this paper is look at more granular data on the income distribution of households using publicly available information to better categorize how much individuals are actually paying for water relative to a better estimate of their income. So we also look at a few socioeconomic characteristics. I think the thing that jumps out the most to us is that affordability concerns are positively correlated with the proportion of Black residents, even after controlling for income. So this is, an environmental justice concern that we have once we have all this data and we can analyze some of the things going on behind the scenes. So lastly, we find that affordability policies that redistribute via water prices are less effective than providing lump sum rebates to customers. And I'll build some intuition for why this is. This is something that economists always like to think about policy designs and how people respond on the margin to marginal prices or versus lump sum prices. And so I'll demonstrate that the way you design an affordability policy, and if it changes the marginal price that people consume, people pay for water, then that can actually counteract the effectiveness of a affordability policy. Okay, so motivation. Since the 1990s, municipal water and sewer service prices have been rising about 3 times faster than the rate of inflation. Over here on the right, I present the water and sewer price index since the late 1997 relative to electricity prices, which have also been going up, and the consumer price index. And what we can see is that water and sewer prices are rising faster than other goods and services. We need over $1 trillion in investment in water and sewer infrastructure just to maintain current levels of service. This is largely the pipes underground, just updating those pipes. This is an out-of-date number. So, I think more research needs to be done on this area as well. We also have increasing compliance costs for water quality regulations. And the majority of all of these costs are going to end up on customers' water and sewer bills. And so we want to know, how much, what is the incidence of the increasing costs ultimately on consumers, and how is that distributed among different income groups, different racial groups, and things like that. So there are affordability policies beginning to be adopted at scale. There are some real policy options. In Philadelphia in 2017, they adopted the nation's first income-based water rate schedule. California is in the process of developing statewide affordability program. You all probably know way more than I do about this program. And then there are many local programs as well, that provide sort of lifeline rates or some other mechanism to defray the cost of water and sewer service for low-income customers. So what is affordability? I think this is something, if you're tuned in today, you probably have some opinion on whether we should be using this 4.5% of median household income metric that the EPA has come out with. This is something, I've tried to track down the exact origin of where this 4.5% of median household income affordability measure has lied. The earliest I can find is in some 1997 guidance. It was originally developed to assess municipalities' ability to pay for infrastructure upgrades to prevent combined sewer overflows. And it's currently under scrutiny. The National Academy of Public Administration recently in the last few years, has come out with a framework for what an affordability metric should entail, what kind of what pieces should it have, and what sort of qualities should it have. And so I'm not here to make it any judgment as to whether 4.5% of median household income is right or wrong. I'll bring some data to highlight why the median household income component is probably inaccurate to actually capturing the burdens faced by low-income customers. But the 4.5% metric, that's not, that's a policy question. That's something that is outside of our realm, but we're going to adopt a similar metric and see how it can be revised, in the context of the tools, the data that we have already. And so I'm not here to convince you that 4.5% of median household income is the right thing, but hopefully I can provide some data to help understand, if we take that as given, what can we learn about the incidence of water bills across the US. So there's some previous estimates. I'm not going to go too deep into this one paper that came out in PLOS One several years ago, but suffice it to say that they develop a framework to estimate affordability across the US, and they find about 12% of households have water bills that are unaffordable, and that can increase over time. But they make some assumptions that I think are likely somewhat removed from what we actually see on the ground, which implies that each household in their sample or in the US consumes about 100 gallons per person per day, which is pretty high, that each household has 4 residents, and that uniform water rates per 1,000 gallons are about $10 per 1,000 gallons, which is on the steeper side. So at the end of the day, they essentially give everyone the same water bill and then divide by income, which varies by census tract across the US. So there's really not much informational content about actual water prices that are being paid by customers. And so we're hoping to improve upon this study by bringing in more data and a more structured approach to thinking about A, how much people are paying for water, but B, can we do something better than median household income? So our approach, we take the 2016 AWWA data from their rate survey, which gives us 264 water and 183 wastewater utilities, mostly in large urban areas from across 42 states. We have, from these data, we have bills at consumption levels of 0, 5, 10, 15, and 30, 100 cubic feet per month. And then we have, what the average bill and average consumption is, a number of accounts within that utility. So from the AWWA data, we have 192 utilities total. We limit our sample to utilities where we can collect both water and wastewater rates. So this 192 is the set of utilities. We hand collected some additional rates so we could maximize the number of water and sewer rates we have there. We also supplement these data with data from the UNC Environmental Finance Center, the EFC, which is a place I used to work before I went on to get my PhD, provides these dashboards that provide really good geographic coverage of a few select states. And so we have bills and rates at different levels and number of accounts, but we don't have things like average consumption. But this buys us water and sewer rates for an additional 1,375 utilities from 7 states. And in these states, we actually get really good coverage, especially for states like Georgia and North Carolina. We have nearly every water rate in the state, which is really exciting. And I think the EFC has done an incredible job of maintaining this resource. I know the CaDC is working on something similar for California. And as someone who consumes data day in and day out of my day job, I really value the data that is being produced. So when you add all this up, we get about 45% of the US population, and this is not representative. And mainly because we have to use the data that we have access to. We don't have, we don't have data for everyone, but we want to maximize the number of utility rates that we have in our sample. Okay, so once we do that, we have this additional problem. We have rate structures, and we need to come up with some way to match these rate structures to a geography. So what we do is we essentially assume that the county in which a utility resides is going to be the county in which we're going to just take the average characteristics of that county and assume that the shapefile of the utility and the shapefile of the county perfectly overlap. That is a simplifying assumption, but when we're working with so many rate structures across the US, that's a necessary, we had to do something, and we are not aware of any resource that provides shapefiles for the service territories of each individual utility for over 1,400 utilities in our sample. So one thing, a couple notes, most utilities adopt block pricing in our survey, in the AWWA survey. And so we approximate what this looks like by just approximating a 3-block structure. We match total bills and at 4 levels and interpolate. So what this figure on the right is showing you is what the total bill would be if it was just the base charge, so no volumetric consumption. If the customer was consuming 500 cubic feet, 1,000 cubic feet, and 1,500 cubic feet. And then here in the white dots, we present an estimate of the average bill based on average consumption. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. So as I said, we aggregate utility data by county, and then we weight that by the number of accounts in that county. Okay, and that's particularly if we have 2 utilities in the same county, we weight the rate structures according to how many accounts are in that given utility within the overall county. So the county becomes our unit of measurement. Okay, how do we calculate local affordability? First, we match water rates to the census block group characteristics. Census block groups tend to be about 1,000 to 2,000, maybe 1,000 to 1,500 households, so relatively small areas. These are going to be, I think that's right. I think could be 1,500 to 3,000 households per census block group. I may be misremembering blocks versus block groups, but that gives us, a reasonable, a neighborhood-sized measure of household characteristics. All of these data are publicly available. And what we want to do is calculate an average consumption within each utility. So AWWA provides this. We know what average mean household consumption is, but EFC does not. And so we generate, what are the, at least methodological advances we do here is we estimate using the AWWA data, an aggregate demand function, which we can then use to apply and predict out of sample for the EFC data where we don't have average consumption. This is just because we want to get a measure of what consumers are actually consuming in a given area. And so we take into account things like income and prices, climate, and things like that, so that we can get an estimate of what consumption is. We'll use that in some cases and not in others, which I'll just discuss. And then we rescale consumption based on an income distribution within block groups. And so this just takes, we assign average consumption to a household with median income in the block group. And then we rescale that based on a 16-node income distribution, which is really just saying we break the income distribution up into 16 different groups, and each group gets a slightly different level of consumption based on the assumption that as income increases, people consume more water, which is supported in the peer-reviewed literature. An income elasticity of 0.1 is pretty small, so we don't get too much change there, but we do account for the fact that wealthier households are more likely to consume more water. Lastly, we calculate annual combined water and sewer bills based on consumption. So this is based on our estimated consumption. And then using all of these data, we determine the proportion of the block group households that have combined water and sewer bills that are greater than 4.5% of their household income. Now, the key here, 4.5% is this EPA metric, which we borrowed off the shelf. We are comparing this to a representative household within the income distribution, within the 16-node income distribution, which suggests that we're actually accounting for a much more granular, a much more fine-grained income distribution than just going out and grabbing the median household income for a utility service area or a county or something like that. Okay, so now we're getting to the results. Now that we have all those, those data pieces and methodological pieces behind the scenes. And so one of the first things we uncovered is that where you apply the 4.5% affordability threshold matters a lot. So median household income at a county level poorly captures the income distribution. This is not surprising. A lot of folks have made this point before. And so what we see over here, this is the distribution of households who have water and sewer bills greater than 4.5% of their household income. And this is, the share, we have a vertical line here at 4.5% as our affordability threshold. But if you think that that's wrong and you want to use 3 or 6, our framework is flexible enough to account for that. And so what this shows is that if you apply the median household income, at the county level, you get 0% of households who have unaffordable water. If you apply that at the block group level, so this is, your larger neighborhood, median household income only captures about 2%, suggests that only 2% of households have unaffordable water and sewer. But once you do this at the more granular income distribution level by actually applying what, a 16, breaking people up into 16 income bins along the distribution, and then applying the affordability threshold, you see that you get up to about 13.6% of households in the US, in our sample, have unaffordable water and sewer service at this 4.5% threshold. And it doesn't matter so much if you, we've done a few things to make that distribution smooth versus just using bins within these income brackets. It doesn't really matter. What we see is that those two curves, the green and the blue curve, are effectively overlapping. But the takeaway is that nearly 1 out of every 7 households in our sample pays more than 4.5% of annual household income on water and sewer bills. The lowest decile pays on average 8.1% of annual household income on water and sewer bills. And we think this, we had an idea of what this number would be, but we think this is at least is probably greater than my initial inclination. And so I think this is something, if you believe 4.5% is more than we should be paying, 4.5% of our income is more than we should be paying on our water and sewer service, this is cause for concern. And again, I just want to emphasize, What we really think our contribution here is the framework to understand and to estimate how, using publicly available data, a more refined approach to measuring income and water bills at a local level. And so in this case, we don't necessarily we use 4.5% as a useful tool, but if you thought 3.5% was the relevant number, you can scale that back. Our framework is still able to estimate how many households have unaffordable water and sewer service at that point. So geography matters, but income matters much more than geographical difference in prices. This is one thing that we uncovered, and I present this figure here. This is the shaded, the gray shaded areas are areas where we don't have data due to our sample selection criteria. But I want to, these Alabama, Georgia, North Carolina, Massachusetts, and Connecticut, Arizona, these are places that the EFC provides really, really good coverage in. And some of the giant counties, I'm sure you're all familiar with the electoral politics in Arizona now and how big some of those counties are from the last few months. But, I think that's a little visually misleading just because the area of these counties is so large. And so what I want to really hone in on is that, we have this wide coverage in our sample, but we also have really fine-grained information within an individual city. So I present here a close-up of Chicago, and these are census block groups shaded by the percentage of households who have unaffordable water. And what you can see is that, in the northern, in the north side of Chicago and on the west, northwest side, you see, most of the neighborhoods have pretty affordable water. This is largely a function of higher incomes in these neighborhoods. The poorer areas of Chicago are going to be on the west side and the south side. These also happen to be neighborhoods that are predominantly Black. And so you can start to see a story playing out here. Everyone in this area has the same water price, but we see a big difference in income, and that's being reflected a lot in our measure of water affordability. It's not just water prices. A lot of this is a bigger underlying problem with income disparities across different cities. So I also want to highlight a few examples where we do have really good coverage. The thing I want to emphasize the most here is that we see that there are counties and in relatively wealthy Massachusetts and Connecticut, and here's where I live in Atlanta. And what we see is that there's actually a lot of pockets of unaffordable water in rural areas and urban areas, and it's a relatively pervasive issue. And so it's not confined to urban areas, it's not confined to rural areas. This is something that that is more pervasive. And on the point of rural areas, one thing we don't have information on is, does someone have a well and a septic system? And are they, we're including them as if everyone in the county is served by the local municipality. That's a limitation that we have, but that's something, a caveat you should keep in mind. Okay, so a few other images just to, I think, really drive home this point that there's a lot of within city variation in affordability. Again, I'll focus on Atlanta because this is where I live. I could try to pick out exactly where I live. I think I live just somewhere along here, right on this border in the, I don't know if you can see.
I can help. If you want to real quick pull up any Word document and hit print, you just
if you're paying attention, please mute yourself. I hear some chatter. So the main point I want to make is that there's, similar to the image I showed you in Chicago, there is, a lot of racial segregation in Atlanta as well. And so the southwest portion of the city tends to be lower income and more predominantly Black. And so the northern, as you get towards the northern suburbs, this becomes whiter and more affluent. So this is representing, spatial differences in income as well as, differences in consumption and prices. Okay, so we started to see this when we looked at the maps, but we also wanted to see, okay, do these trends hold if you actually control for things like income and number of households below the poverty level? So we started running some regressions to understand whether there were any significant differences across different socioeconomic characteristics and the proportion of households above the affordability threshold. So what we see is that the proportion of households below we see positive associations between affordability concerns and the proportion of households below the poverty limit. This is not surprising. Average water rates, also not surprising. When prices are higher, we see larger affordability concerns. Average household size, and I think the thing that jumped out to us the most is that the proportion of Black residents is also positively associated with affordability concerns. I'm not going to go through and walk through what's in the table exactly, but I just wanted to highlight that. We don't find any association between affordability concerns and population density, or the proportion of Hispanic residents, or the budget share of rent, which is a proxy for housing costs. Okay, so now I want to switch gears a little bit and think about, okay, we've used these data to tell us something about what the problem looks like. What can we do about it? If we think we should, this is a problem we should address via policy, how might we design a water affordability policy that is both effective and efficient? So we simulate 4 illustrative self-funded policies. And so programs have the same size, which means that the total dollars transferred within the program is equivalent. Whether you're eligible for the program is whether your household pays more than 4.5% of income. And this isn't calculated at your estimated consumption level. This assumes that there's an essential level of consumption of 50 gallons per person per day. And so if at that level, at 50 gallons per person per day, you consume more than 4.5% of your income, you will be eligible to receive benefits from this program, which will lower the cost of your water and sewer service. The way we design benefits, we have 2 options. One is a 50% rate discount. So the price that you pay for water goes down by 50%. Or we just give you that same amount of money in a lump sum transfer. And this could be something like a credit on your bill, or the key thing is that it doesn't change the price you actually pay for water, but it's a transfer that you receive as kind of an income transfer or something like that. So funding, the way we fund this is either through a rate increase on the non-eligible customers. So if you're a relatively wealthy household, you will end up paying slightly more on your bill to account for the transfers to low-income customers, or we consider a local income tax. These are all very, very simplified ways to design a program, but what we wanted to do was really highlight what the different mechanisms through which you could implement a program like this, and then the relative benefits. And then obviously, if you were designing a program in your own utility, it would take into consideration a lot of other factors. We're being very intentionally blunt with how we're thinking about these types of policies. So we also scale outcomes in a couple of ways. We allow for the fact that people respond to changes in price. This is largely going to matter for if you raise rates on ineligible customers and lower rates for eligible customers, that's going to change how much water they consume. We don't have many laws in economics, but the law of demand is kind of the one that we stand by, which means that when the price goes up, people consume less of it, and vice versa. So the evaluation criterion we're going to use just to measure how much, how effective or what the relative benefits of these policies are we're going to be focusing on the change in the percentage of households with unaffordable water and sewer service. Okay, so what might a water affordability policy look like? So I'm first showing you in this gray line, this is the same figure I showed you before. This suggests that 13.6% of households in the US have water and sewer rates or expenditures greater than 4.5% of their income. Each of these other lines is what that would look like under our simulated policy. So in green, this is the price increase plus a 50% rate reduction. In the red line is the price increase plus the lump sum rebate. In the yellow line, this is the tax increase plus a 50% rate reduction. And in the blue line, this is the tax increase plus the rebate. And so what we see is that if we have a rate reduction funded by price increases, that only gets us from 13.6 down to 11% of households who have unaffordable water and sewer service. But just by the design of the program, if we have lump sum rebates funded by income taxes, that can actually get us down from 13.6 down to 5.6 percentage of households who have unaffordable water and sewer. And that reduces the affordability burden by 59%. And so just by the design of these two different policies, which are exactly the same size, in both cases, we're transferring the same dollar value from one group to the other. We see that the program design matters a lot. And the main point, the main reason here is that people do respond to marginal incentives. We know that people respond to water prices. And so the main difference, the mechanics behind these two different policies are that this rate reduction funded by price increases is going to increase consumption for the low-income people who you want to provide benefits to, and it's going to change the very marginally, but it'll reduce the amount of water that higher income folks consume. And so the lump sum rebates funded by income taxes, those policy decisions were very intentional because they don't change the marginal incentives that individuals have to consume more or less water. And so the main point with these price increases and rate reductions are that you can actually have these can actually counteract the effectiveness of the policy. And one thing I always like to think about is if I were a low-income customer and my water utility told me, hey, we're going to give you free water because you don't have that much income, I would say, okay, great. I'm going to start a car washing business in my driveway because I have, zero input costs, and and so I would increase my consumption. Obviously, that's a little extreme, but I think that drives home the point that people do respond to these marginal incentives, and those can counteract the policy goals that you might want. This is just calculating the combined water sewer bill as a proportion of income. The main thing I want to show is that in this lowest annual household income bracket, you see the biggest reductions in the total combined water and sewer bill over income as a percentage among these 50%. Among the lump sum rebate for this red and blue group. Just another way of looking at the policy results. Okay, and this is the actual, just one more way of looking at the results. This is just the actual combined water and sewer bill that you might see if you implemented this type of policy. Again, I'll focus your attention on this lowest income group. And what we see is that the total water bill for this red and blue group who receives this income lump sum is actually a lot lower than these two groups that receive a price reduction. Everybody is lower than the baseline, the current water bill. And you can see some differences, there's that decreasing trend in this next income group. And then, we start to get into households who are above the eligibility threshold. And there's some interesting things in there, but I'm not going to go go into those. So the main policy takeaway that we arrived at was that we shouldn't distort marginal incentives to consume more or less water. This, the economics has a phrase for what this is, and this is really just that what we have is the second fundamental law of welfare economics states that you can support a competitive equilibrium with lump sum transfers. That's a really technical, wordy way of saying people respond to prices, and so if you care about income redistribution, potentially through the water bill, what you want to do is not necessarily adjust how much people are going to consume, but you want to give them money in a way that's not going to distort their incentives to consume more or less water. Okay, so I'm just going to conclude. What do we find in this study? We find that water affordability does appear to be a nationwide concern. 1 in 7 households in our sample pay more than 4.5% of their income on water and sewer bills, and we find some evidence that Black communities are more affected. Should we revise the EPA affordability threshold? I'm going to punt on this. This is not the point of our study. 4.5% of annual income is arbitrary, but so are a lot of other affordability metrics that have been proposed. And so I like 4.5% only because it's easy and transparent and publicly known, but it's a really poor proxy for household expenditures. And so the one conclusion we draw is that if you're going to use some measure of expenditures relative to income, it's really important to measure income at a local level. And so hopefully, I think we've provided constructively a framework or a methodological approach to measuring the income distribution in situations like this, which we think will be helpful, but we're not here to tell you what sort of affordability metric you should use. But if you want to evaluate it, please come talk to us. So affordability policy at the county level can help, but the key insight, at least from economics, from our perspective, is that it's important not to distort marginal incentives to consume water, and that can actually distort the effectiveness of the policy. So future work, one thing that we're pretty excited about trying to do is seeing how well our approach, our methodological approach at this aggregate scale actually represents what's going on the ground level. And so we've actually been partnering with the CaDC folks to tie in our framework with micro level, household level billing data to see, are we capturing the right income and the right consumption trends in an aggregate way that also makes that also looks right on the ground? Is it, we're trying to ground truth these estimates. And we've built and we have the mechanics behind the scenes to do more with this large scale water rate and consumption database. So we're exploring options for how this could be better used. But we're also, we realize that the policies we've designed to evaluate are very simplistic. And so our county level policy is realistic with fragmented utilities. And what's the role of states and or federal policies? In electricity, we do have federal affordability policies. And so is that something that would work realistically in water consumption? And there are a lot of institutional details that don't carry over, but I think it's worth having that conversation. And then, something I think a lot about are nonlinear rates, like increasing block rates and budget-based rates. Are these mitigating affordability concerns already, and to what extent? There's some evidence that these increasing block rates and budget-based rates are not actually doing that much in terms of equity. So that's something that me and a few co-authors are working on as well. And then lastly, what's the implications for water conservation and financing water infrastructure? How does revenue change? How does the ultimate incentive to consume water change? And with that, feel free to reach out at any point with questions. More than happy to get feedback, but I'm also really excited to open this up and answer any questions that you have as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Casey. I think we have a bunch of questions and some discussion that came into the chat. So I think I'm going to start at the top and read some of these off to you, Casey. So we have a question from Kathleen Peroni that when you look at household income, does that include income from social safety net programs?
Yeah, that's a great question. Currently, no. We're just including income as reported on the census. So our income information comes from the American Community Survey. There are ways we could probably incorporate government transfers and things like that currently, but we are not, and so that's something that is not being reflected in the statistics that I showed you.
Awesome. And then it looks like we have a few comments here about the some offers to provide data that could help you drill down into particular counties. Looks like Adele Abdallah and Amanda Fensel also linked to a few some other affordability research. So I would encourage folks to check those out. It looks really interesting.
Yeah, and I'll just say,
go ahead.
I'll just say, in the interest of time, I wanted to focus on what's new from our study, but there's a lot in our paper, which we do have publicly available. We do have some comparisons to alternative metrics of affordability that have been proposed, and so I wanted to, I didn't include much literature review, but we're aware, but we're always interested in learning more about other studies out there that are using similar data, similar approaches.
We have another sort of, I guess, a question here from Adele that look at, saying that it would be interesting to look at indoor versus outdoor use. Is that something that you have thought about or that's relevant for this work, Casey?
So that's not something we have information on here, except to the extent that indoor-outdoor use reflects average consumption that we do see, in the sense that, in Western states, seasonal consumption, the gap between winter and summer consumption is much, much bigger than what we see in Eastern states. That said, on average, I think this is true. I'd have to triple check, but I'm pretty sure that the price kind of compensates for that. In any case, in the sense that on the East Coast, prices are actually higher, primarily because there's a lot of older infrastructure, but so it almost balances out. That said, we haven't focused explicitly on indoor and outdoor consumption, and that is something that should matter. I don't think, I don't think it makes sense to have an affordability policy that ensures that you have a green lawn in the summer. And so that it doesn't strike me as that being a type of essential use. And so the one thing I will say is when we thought about when we thought about who it would be eligible for an affordability policy, it's not so much, we didn't want to base that on, are you, irrigating your lawn? We wanted to focus on, we used a 50 gallon per person per day metric to determine that threshold, but that's also a policy choice. We can scale that. That's a really easy parameter to change to update our results as well. And now I do have the chat open, so I'm seeing, I apologize, one of the flaws of Zoom is that you can't see this coming in, or at least I couldn't while I was giving my talk.
Yeah, no worries. And we found it helps, it works pretty well to wait till the end. But we have a question here from Matt Owens about the minimum wage, which I know is a very, very hot topic right now. And the question is, how might an increase in the minimum wage reduce the affordability burden? And how would that compare or maybe interact with, water affordability rates?
This is a great question, Matt. I might borrow this and put it on an exam for my principles of economics students. It's, well, obviously an increase in the minimum wage is going to increase the income. So, at the end of the day, what we're doing, we have a ratio. We have water expenditures divided by income. And so if income goes up, particularly for that low income, below the 0 to 15K group, we're going to see a reduction in that. And so I think that would certainly, I don't know how long it would take to reflect in our data, but that's something that would certainly reduce the affordability burden amongst low-income customers. And I think the second part of the question was, how does such a policy compare to water affordability rates? It's an interesting question. My sense is that, from a policy perspective, it's, are you attacking the numerator or are you attacking the denominator? The water rates are going to, change how much what incentive you have to consume water, whereas an income increase across the board is going to not affect those marginal incentives. But it's a minimum wage is going to do a lot of other things in the economy, a minimum wage increase. And so if you're really concerned about water affordability, the minimum wage is certainly raising the minimum wage would certainly help with that. But it's not going to be a targeted program towards water affordability. So, that's kind of how I would think about it.
Yeah, a much broader brush, it sounds like.
But maybe just to riff on that a little bit, it's also, I had a slide in here, should we be redistributing income through the water rates? I think that's a good question. And we have affordability programs for electricity. We have affordability programs for food, or we have SNAP and WIC and things like that. So we have a lot of redistributive programs that target very specific things. And I think there's both 2 points I want to make here. One, those can be effective for, the one isolated component that they're focusing on. But two, we should also take into account the information that is being used to determine eligibility for other means tested programs. If you have 10 different affordability programs across different goods and services, it makes more sense from my perspective to have a common way of measuring what affordability is. And so I think in that point, there's a lot of work being done on water affordability, but I think it's also, it would be good for us to think more holistically about what, how we're thinking about affordability in other contexts.
And we have a lot of questions, but that sounds like, I just want to riff on that just a little bit also, because you're talking about, and I'm not an economist, so maybe this is obvious, but is this something like, could you sort of create like a, I don't know, affordability index or something that bundles all these, water and food and something like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's feasible. Research groups could do that, and I think there are some, there are some things I've seen in that flavor, but it's, I guess, especially with water, if, even just taking electricity and water, or, energy burdens and water burdens together, we don't consume water and energy in a vacuum. When I run my dishwasher, when I wash clothes, I'm consuming both water and energy. And so it starts to make less sense to me to think about each of these markets in isolation when you can actually, when there's, our daily decisions as consumers, as individuals, as families, involves a more complex production process of, okay, if I have affordable water, does that mean I have unaffordable something else? And how do we think about the holistic suite of expenditures that families are dealing with? And so I think that's, kind of where I come down on it. And I've been starting in my own research to think more about the complementarities, both across consumption of goods and services that overlap, as well as, how we should think about interacting policies in that context as well. And one thing that specific to California water affordability, one thing I noticed is that for ease of actually getting money out to people within the proposed affordability program, and it may have changed, I may not have the most up-to-date details, is that you are actually going to rebate the water affordability payments on an electricity bill. or at least I remember reading that a while back. And that has interesting implications because do people understand that that's for their water bill, or was that going to change their energy consumption as a result? And so I like to think about these things more holistically, but let's get back to the questions.
Sure. We have a question from Nicole Chang. Would you be able to talk more about your finding that water affordability is not correlated with budget share of rent?
Yes, so I can actually pull that that slide up. So, one thing that I think we're missing here is that we have, we wanted to try to control for the housing costs that renters pay. And so we include a few variables like occupied units that are rented, the proportion of those within a block group, the median gross rent relative to income. And so one thing that we don't have is, the reason we want to control for that is we don't know how many, we don't know who exactly is paying their water bill. If I'm a renter, I might have water included in my rent. And so it's not clear who is actually paying the rent. And so we don't find any evidence of once you control for all of these other things like household size and income and other characteristics of like how many units are being occupied, we find no association between affordability concerns and housing costs. But that's, I think, missing a bigger picture, and that's one of the sacrifices we've had to make by looking at more aggregate results. We can't really focus in on who's actually paying their water and sewer bill. And economists would say like, well, that's something that's probably just embedded in their rental cost. And so if, it doesn't really matter whether, this is something I don't necessarily agree with because I haven't actually seen any good data on how much of water and sewer costs are passed through in terms of monthly rental amounts. But, that's something that we didn't see an association to, but it might be a result of us just looking, trying to capture a large proportion of the US as opposed to focusing on, very micro or looking only at one utility and getting really good data on that utility.
Interesting. We have looks like I think this we may have missed the context here, but Adele is asking something, is that like the natural gas tax credit? Not quite. I think it was referring to your policy proposals at the end. All right, I guess, do you see any similarities there?
So I'm not seeing the question. Oh, is that like the natural gas for heating tax credit? So if that's clarifying how we think about lump sum transfers, I think so. Yeah, that could be one way. We were kind of intentionally vague about how this lump sum transfer would work, but something like a tax credit would work. And there is likely research out there that captures what the best way to provide income, subsidies essentially to households would be. I'm not super familiar with the natural gas tax credit, but if it was referring to energy affordability programs, I was thinking of things like the low income heating and energy assistance program, I think LIHEAP. So that's another example.
And just checking the time, I think, yeah, I'm actually not sure we have enough time for another question. I think we should probably wrap things up so folks can get to their meetings at 1. So apologies if we didn't get to your question, but really excited to have such a great response from all the attendees. And would really like to thank all of you for coming, and would really like to thank you, Casey, for speaking. As I mentioned, the recording of this will be shared after the meeting, so keep an eye out for that. And I guess other breaking news, mark your calendars. The 6th annual Water Data Summit, that's the CaDC's big annual event each year, will be coming August 19th and 20th this year. So yeah, save the date. And beyond that, thanks everyone.
Thank you all. Thanks, Chris, for putting this together.
Thanks, Casey.